So everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight for Community Chat. My name is Trevor with Rolling with Advantage, and tonight I am joined by my friend Danny, and I'm also joined by our friend Jeff Talanian, who is the creator of Hyperborea, and we're here to talk about all things Appendix N, Inspiration, Hyperborea, the new 3rd edition, and just kind of take questions from the community as well. So if you have questions for Mr. Talanian, please put them in chat, and we will try to get to them. I have a list of questions that we talked about in Discord today, and we're gonna go ahead and dive in. So the first thing that we're gonna talk about tonight, the first topic, is going to be inspirations. And I would like to ask you, I know some of the answers, but what are some of the other writers, movies, or music? Like, what are the things that inspires you when you create Hyperborea? So
besides the obvious big three that we often mention of Clark Ashton Smith and H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard, I was also inspired by a lot of the stuff that I really enjoyed growing up, whether that be reading old Savage Sword of Conan magazines, cinema such as, Ray Harryhausen, stop motion films like Jason and the Argonauts and the Sinbad movies, cartoons like Thundar the Barbarian, just a whole medley of different things that inspire the Hyperborea world and setting. But also, not to be forgotten is the Greek mythology that it's hard to trace down when you search for actual references by Herodotus and Pindar regarding Hyperborea and what was written, thousands of years ago about this mythological land. So, sort of working that in, some of that mythology, and just a lot of the other sort of, as you say, the Appendix N authors that, I felt like there was some serious holes with Appendix N, so some of my favorites aren't in there. Like we were just talking about Carl Edward Wagner a short while ago, and I don't believe that he is in there, right? And so he's a personal favorite of mine, and then you get into stuff like Edgar Rice Burroughs. Michael Moorcock is a favorite of mine. You can cite the Elric works because those are his most popular, but I think closer in feel to a lot of what Hyperborea is you can look at the Hawkmoon stories because they have that sort of sorcery and science medley going on. So there's just so much. It really is a melting pot of influences under the the name of Hyperborea in this game.
So I wanted to ask you specifically one thing. I've been collecting Appendix N and weird fiction for a couple of years now. That's Danny's fault, and I have collected all these books, and I have more than I can read. So I'm trying, and the problem that I run into is I'll read Robert Howard or Clark Ashton Smith, and then I'll read, H.P. Lovecraft, and then I'm like, I got to read somebody else. I recently picked up Burroughs, and I've been going through The Princess of Mars. I am falling in love with that book. I have a question. Was that any of your inspiration as well? Because there's a weird fiction feel to that.
Yeah, I mean that's there's so many labels for subgenres of science fiction and fantasy. What do they call that? Sword and Sandal
or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I loved. Actually, some of my favorite Burroughs work was actually Carson of Venus, Carson Napier. And so I really love those. Only 5 books in that series, but those were actually, I enjoyed those the best. And also Tarzan at the Earth's Core, different Pellucidar related stuff. So yeah, I read a lot of Burroughs growing up. Also, similar to that is when you look at Arthur Conan Doyle. His different Professor Challenger series of stories that take place in a sort of dinosaur-like continent that's very Burroughs-like. I love that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, I mean there's so many cool things that, that, like you said, there's more books than you have time. It's like you have to say, how many years do I have left? How many more?
Yeah, I know, right?
How many more revolutions around the sun do I have, and which books can I read during that time?
So, how I discovered your game, I was on a road trip with Danny up to see our friend in Nashville, and he was telling me about Appendix N. It was something I played AD&D back in the day, but I had just kind of forgotten about it. And he was telling me about all these books. I was like, well, I've read some of these. And we went to a bookstore, and he started like getting me some stuff. And he's like, look, if you find Clark Ashton Smith, that's like the hardest thing to find. That's the best author. And I couldn't find it. And he finally gifted me a book. And I read some Clark Ashton Smith, and it was like, for me, it was like watching like color television for the first time. Like it just completely blew my mind. And I called Danny. I was like, Danny, this is insanely good. And he's like, I think somebody made a game based off of this. I was like, wait,
Really?
what? Yeah. And so I found your website. I bought the book just off the fact that Clark Ashton Smith's name was attached to it in some way. Like, I don't care. This looks great. And I got it in, and when I saw the art, it just blew me away. Like, before, because you know how you get a book and you start flipping through it? I flipped through it, and I saw the art, and I'm like, this looks incredible, because I also grew up on Savage Sword of Conan. And as I read the book, because I first got it like, hey, maybe this will be a cool book to get some ideas from, and then I was like, no, I'm straight playing this game. This game is great. So I want to toss this a little over to Danny, because he's our English professor, and he freaking loves Clark Ashton Smith. So, Danny, you take it away with your Clark Ashton Smith questions.
Fight all those adverbs and adjectives?
That's it.
Oh, yeah. Gonna dissect the color of the drapes. Yeah. I guess, what are some of the specific Clark Ashton Smith stories? I know, like, Zothique is his kind of dying Earth type setting. And Hyperborea, of course.
Of course, you could definitely say that that Jack Vance was in. I don't know that he ever directly said it, but as far as the dying, he's often credited as being the creator of the dying Earth genre. But I would say that it's Clark Ashton Smith.
Right. Yeah.
So your question: what other stuff? So the Averoigne stuff, I really love that, because it's like a lot of French countryside type of horror type of feel. I feel like those stories are kind of like Clark Ashton Smith sort of dabbling in the Edgar Allan Poe type of genre, but in the French countryside. But in Ashton Smith's definitive style that he was unparalleled. The way he wrote, it was just, you can look at it. I can understand why it's difficult to absorb at first for some readers, because you have to, when you're reading Smith, it's like the first obstacle in it is establishing the author's rhythm of his prose, because his prose is so evocative and so colorful, and so it really takes you into these other worlds. And it's amazing to think that he was writing this stuff about 100 years ago, before we knew all these things about the way the atmospheres are in other planets, and just the different descriptions of these these alien architectures, and everything within is just so amazing. But yeah, Zothique is amongst my favorite stuff. And of course, the Hyperborea. I find the Zothique to be a little more serious and grim and dark. The Hyperborea stuff is a little bit more sardonic. It has a little more of that type of, little bit of that humor to it, a little bit of that gotcha, be careful what you wish for type of endings to some of the stories. Dealing with greed and things like that. When you look at
Satamtra Zeros is my favorite.
And
that was the first story I read, and it just blew me away. The whole "do we want bread or wine" question, that he asked in that, I just love. And so Danny, do you have any other specific questions for Clark Ashton Smith, or any other writings? Because you're our Appendix N guy.
Well, I think what are some of the specific Appendix N authors or stories that you would cite as being very inspirational for your game? I know all of them pretty much, there's an amalgamation, but like any specifics for any of the mechanics or spells or anything like that?
Sure. I think that there So there, like you said, there are a lot of inspirations and influences throughout it, and you can see those in different things. You can see where I'm sort of drawing off of Abraham Merritt for something, like for the god Aurorus. And it's different different authors inspiring different types of small elements within the setting. But when you talk about some of the stories that really veer closest to what I'm trying to establish with Hyperborea as far as its mood and its setting go, you know, you just said, shown a little while ago, I don't know if you can hold it up for your audience, that Bloodstone book.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so what Carl Edward Wagner had with Kane in his Kane stories is this sort of dystopic, dark future world of sorcery in which there are these ancient scientific artifacts that could be found. And it's almost like a dark, serious version of what you might find in a sort of Thundar the Barbarian in this post-apocalyptic world of some sort. And Kane has been walking the earth since, he was banished to the land of Nod or something. And so between the dark sorcery that Kane employs, so when you look at Kane, so okay, I can talk a little bit mechanics. When I was thinking of characters like Kane and say Elric, and you see that they are not only these warrior types, but they also command sorcery. And as I was developing the game, I was like, I don't want to have a game with you just have to play a magic user, or you have to pick being a fighter, or if you want to combine the two together, you have to go through this whole thing of multi-classing, or some type of thing like that, in which you're adding classes, as some of the newer games do. I wanted to have these sort of hybrid class options in which you could play a swordsman who is also a sorcerer. But the rub on it is that the experience point plateaus are a little bit higher. So when your fellow thief in the party is gaining a level and your warlock has yet to gain a level, then that's the price that you're paying.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So we mentioned Hawkmoon earlier. So Hawkmoon is another one that in Grand Breton, which is this futuristic empire that has taken over all of Europe, and America is sort of this wasteland across the ocean. And it's this dark alternate future, but it's also in Moorcock's multiverse. So it's one sort of, you could say, a shade of Earth where things went in a different direction. But in that world, you have magic, but you also have these weird technological devices, and some of them coming from the Far East, and all these weird machinery that can transport people through time, and teleportation, and the machine that embedded this gem in Hawkmoon's forehead. And I like all that kind of weird stuff. And when I'm reading stories like that, I'm like, wow, this is the kind of stuff that I love, in which you really have that blending of sorcery and science fiction together.
Mm-hmm. So we were running a game for the community for Hyperborea, a West Marches style game. And I had brought some players in to play. And the first game they played, they fought some of these crabs. And the combat's going, these massive crab men. And then one of the crabs shoots a laser and kills one of the players. And the table immediately was like, this is a different game. The crabs are shooting lasers. And it was such a great, welcome to Hyperborea. The crabs have lasers.
Right. You're not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah, it was weird, and it was a great welcome to a different game, and all of a sudden everyone had buy-in. Even the player who got blasted was like, "I love this game, I want to come back." Shout out to BG for getting turned into from dust from the crab beast, but I love that, and I will say when I was first going through the second edition of the game, and I was trying to. Because when I wanted to run this game, I was like, Hyperborea cannot be run like other games. It has to feel different. The world is different. And I wanted to not just get the tone, but also it's an alien world in a sense. Just because of the way that you described the astronomy of all the different planets and the moons and the different settings. And it blew me away when I was going through the astronomy section of the book. And I saw that you had like the seasons and how many hours of the day versus, because it would be like, you have like a 13-year cycle. And when I first read this, and the first review I did for the second edition, I made the statement, it's like, a lot of people won't use this, but I think it's super cool. But the more I have played it, I'm telling people absolutely use that, because the goal in me for the setting is to make it feel like a different world. You're not in Greyhawk. You're not in Forgotten Realms. You're not in whatever else. You're not in Middle Earth. This is a totally different world. And as you start explaining, like the different moons and the planets that you see in the sky and everything, it just makes it feel alien. So I have to ask, where did the inspiration come from for the amount of work that you did for the astronomy part of this? Because I'm an astronomy nerd, and even though I know this is like a fictional, I freaking love it. I absolutely love it. So I'm just curious, like, where did all that research come from?
Starting with a baseline of being inspired by Clark Ashton Smith, and particularly his Zothique cycle. I wanted to, I started off with the core being the red giant sun that is soon to expire. And also this is also seen in Jack Vance's Dying Earth, in which you have this red giant sun that is soon to expire. So everyone lives in this sort of state of futility, because they know that no matter what you do, we are ultimately doomed, because it's all coming to an end soon. Mm-hmm. So I thought, how can I create a world setting that explores different wild stuff like this? And in this, as I was coming up with this conception of it, I wanted to have this sort of weird realm that was in which we extracted Hyperborea from Old Earth, and the rest of Old Earth has since been absorbed by the red giant sun, because the inner planets, if you read or watch any programs on, our sun, which is 4.5 billion years old, and it's determined to be about halfway through its own life cycle, that as our sun gets to that point, it will absorb the inner planets first. They'll mm-hmm. start to crumble and fall apart and just get sucked into its gravity, mm-hmm. which I think is fantastic. It kind of solves all our problems. You don't have to worry about the price of gas anymore. So anyways, so getting on with it. So I really wanted Saturn to be a prominent part of that cosmology, but I didn't want to have. I didn't want it to turn into a science lesson. I also wanted it to be fantasy. So, when occasionally someone will try to bring up, what's logical for, a futuristic solar system such as ours, and where I might be wrong on certain elements regarding this, my answer would be, we're talking about a hexagonal plane, that's a flat Earth that is, being dragged along by Saturn and, floating around.
It is still a work of fiction, right? Yeah,
it's a work of fiction.
But right. I feel that there's just enough science in it for me to buy in. It's not like, I'm not saying it's 100% accurate, but there's just enough there, like, okay, this makes sense. And it
you want to have that grounding. So there's, like right. I said, it's a flat Earth, and there are monsters and weird things going on, and magical phenomenon, and sorcerers cast spells, but there are also, birds will migrate,
right.
Tides, ocean tides will flow, and reproduction happens in the usual way, and things of that nature,
Right. So this will segue into, we had a lot of questions come in that were similar, so I'll go ahead and ask it broad, and it was, since we're talking about this, is there a plan down the road to have some type of module for visiting other realms, like a Spelljammer-esque thing, because I feel like there's a piece of this already in the game, and I kind of touched in on it in my homebrew game, but I was just curious, do you have any plans to do like a Saturn module, or You know, like, because there's all these other planets listed, but I was curious if you had any ideas of maybe a third edition adventure or something module that explores those things.
Yeah, I have a lot of notes that I've gathered, and I've done some of this already. I have in my own home group. Well, what I do with my home group is, we have several groups of characters. They have about 4 different parties, and then from week to week, they don't. I kind of surprise them with which party we'll be playing on that particular week, and then we might stay with that party for a few months.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, one of the groups is actually on Saturn, and I have this long list of notes that I've been taking to on how Saturn works in this, fictional solar system. So that would be that would definitely be the first one that I would do, would be Saturn. If it would, talking about off planet from Hyperborea is, yes, Saturn would be it.
Okay, so I have to quite the obvious question: is Door to Saturn one of your inspirations for that, for Clark Ash's?
Oh yes, of course, yes. I took the most notes on that. On my version of Saturn, I have Sathagwa's uncle.
Right.
Is the primary deity of worship. And he's just this giant Stegosaurus-like monster that's crawling around and is this lewd and crude beast.
So I took a lot of liberty on that story as well for my game. I loved it. That's awesome. All right, so as we move over from the next question. All right, so I know you've talked about this in other places, but when the move came to go from second edition to third edition, I know I've heard other interviews and things you've talked about how originally it was just like, hey, we're just going to do a new print, a new update, and then all of a sudden you started changing some things, adding some art, and all of a sudden it was like, hey, we've got all new edition at this point. What were the biggest changes that you saw going from 2E to 3E as far as, mechanically, I guess? What were the big changes? I know combat being one, if you want to speak to that.
Combat system, we used to run this combat system for first and second edition that had phases in the combat, and what that basically meant was that your action could be sort of parsed out between these two different phases, which it worked well in practice, but I felt as though it was probably one of the greatest causes for confusion for a lot of players, and I could say that based on a lot of the emails and private messages that I've received over the years since 2012, publishing the first edition of the game. So really, what we did with third edition was simplify it but retain the intent. And the intent was that there will be certain actions in which you seek to perform that may not happen immediately in the round, which means that whether you won or lost your initiative roll, that you'll be going last in the round. And that could be determined by, say, movement or some other extended type of action that you're seeking to perform that would take you just a little bit deeper into the round without telling the player that, no, you can't do that this round. You have to, move this round and then take that action the next round. It gives a little bit more flexibility than your standard type of either cast the spell or move this round. It gives you the chance to do a little bit of both at a price.
Gotcha. When I was going through... Right. And I was going through third edition, it was almost like an Easter egg hunt to find little things, because I found like little things that were different, like dual wielding was a little different. It was, and I think to what you said, intent was kept, but it was simplified.
Right.
Because I thought the original where you got like your minuses were different between offhand and main hand based on your dexterity, and all of it made perfect sense. But it was a little cumbersome to remember what number you are where, and now it's just a flat number -2.
Right. So what that basically solved was, now you're not sticking your nose in a book to figure out what your modifiers are when you want to pull this maneuver. Instead, it's a couple of simple modifiers that
Right.
you can just apply to the action, and it doesn't break, it sort of breaks that, it breaks the mood when you're in the game. It breaks flow, I think, when you have to stop and look up something. I understand when you have to stop and look up something for a spell, because some spells are complicated, and that's okay.
Mhm.
But sometimes I feel like something as simple as I'm wielding a dagger in one hand and a short sword in the other, and I want to swing them both in this round and take the extra attack at the penalty, and then you're digging into books to figure out how that works. To me, that seems like the kind of thing that should just be simply solved.
Right. That makes sense. I run a fast game, so I generally try to not. I'm with you. I don't want to break the flow unless you get something really tricky that can, like, hey, this could sway the entire encounter. We need to look up particularly spells. They can get kind of funky in there. I think the other big thing that I saw moving was, of all the classes, the one I thought was changed the most was monk.
Right.
I have not seen a monk at a table yet, but I'm dying to. Can you speak a little bit to the change to monk?
Yeah, so the monk went through several changes, and it was sort of divorcing it from the old school methods of how the monk was presented in earlier, Gygaxian versions, and his various co-authors. Because the monk when you look back at the monk, if you look at Dragon magazine, there were so many different iterations of the monk that were presented over the years, and so I tried to do something that was faithful to tradition, but I found it cumbersome in practice at how some of the things worked for the monk. So in this revision, the monk was definitely the class that was changed the most. Little things like monks were not able to use their strength or dexterity bonuses for certain things if they, if when we're talking about melee, missile combat. Also, the way the hand-to-hand combat worked, I tried to give them this opportunity to do something that normally only the fighting type classes could do, which is to have a 2/1 attack rate, but that's only with their open hand that they can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to change some things about how the monk worked, but then it has a ripple effect, because when the monk only had one attack per round in earlier editions, he or she was able to stun on a 19 or 20, but with this now improved attack rate to 2/1, it seemed a little bit too generous to retain a 19 and 20. So now it's only on that natural 20 is the monk going to possibly stun an opponent. It just little changes like that throughout really made me look at the monk and say, this is the one that really has been changed the most. But it's not too radical.
It's one of those moves. It's not huge. But I think mechanically at the table, I think if someone playing the monk is going to see a huge change on something simple like that. Because before, if they wanted to do multiple attacks, they had to dual wield, they had to take the penalties, and they had to do all of that. Where now this was, it is a class I haven't seen at the table yet, but I'm dying to see that one. So I'm very curious what the community that plays the monk, what their feedback has been. I'm sure it's got to be pretty positive, because I feel the monk got a lot more powerful with that.
Yeah, well, if nobody ends up playing one soon, you can always make one show up as a sort of NPC, right?
I think so. I think I need to make one just come kick the crap out of everybody, and then say, "Hey, the monks are pretty good, right?"
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Other changes in the additions that we've noticed so far, I think and it's little things. Like there was one you put up on Discord the other day when we were talking about the ranger. A ranger can do additional damage to otherworldly monsters. And I think in 3rd edition it was actually added. Now we know exactly what an otherworldly monster is. It's like put in the parentheses. Was that in 2nd edition as well?
Well, the change was basically that. So in the 1st edition of the game, we actually listed all the otherworldly monsters that they could do this extra damage against. But the problem with that is we started to add more otherworldly monsters, and some of them were new monsters that were added in the appendices of adventure modules.
Mm-hmm.
And so as more things got added, it became one of my editors, David Prada, came up with the idea, hey, maybe we should just say, that they have these bonuses versus otherworldly monsters and make sure we just note for every monster that's otherworldly in the monster section. So I thought that was a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went with that to make it
like a classification.
A classification. And it also, it sort of simplifies it. The players don't have to worry about if they know what a certain monster is. The game referee can tell them that this is, you recognize this as one of your creatures that you're diametrically opposed to and that you've trained to destroy.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really cool mechanic, and it's one of those things. If you look at the math on it, Ranger is one of those classes that it kind of gets dumped on in a lot of other games and other editions, and I think the Ranger in Hyperborea is extremely powerful, and so I'm excited. All right, so that leads me to this question: were there any classes that didn't make it into the game? Like, what was left on the cutting floor? I was always curious because whenever I look at this, it's like, if you were to expand and make more classes, this game has so many classes. Like, I don't know what you would add. So I was just curious as the creator, was there anything that didn't quite make it?
Yeah, I put a lot of effort into this sort of seer class. Mm-hmm. And the more that I tried, it felt like the more that I squeezed it, I felt like the sand was squeezing between my fingers. And I reached a point where I just shelved it because I came to the conclusion that what I was doing with the seer didn't feel like a playable class. It felt like an NPC class. It didn't. So I was never exactly satisfied with that. But that was left on the cutting floor of 2E. And when I was because it was going to be the new cleric subclass, and what I ended up replacing that with was the rune graver, and that was easy for me to do because at the time I had been sort of reacquainting myself with a lot of the sagas. I was reading the Greenland sagas and various interpretations that were done on Iceland and by Snorri. Was it Snorri Sturluson? I forget who's the chronicler of many of these tales. And my favorite out of the sagas was this character named Egil. And Egil was just a son of a bitch. He was evil. That's where I got the idea is for the knithing pole that he carves this pole that he mounts to lay a curse on a jarl of another village, and just that he was just a murderer, a terrible person, but he was also likable in a strange way, anti-hero. And he was a great inspiration for me as I put together the whole the rune graver subclass of the cleric. So anyway, to answer your question, so I didn't really leave anything on the floor for third edition. I actually just added one little wrinkle to one class that you probably noticed, which was the Fell Paladin. And so the idea behind that was, when I used to look at the old in Dragon magazine, the anti-paladin. The anti-paladin in classic AD&D was supposed to be the exact opposite of the paladin, in which it was chaotic evil. And I thought to myself, I really don't want that. I want a sort of paladin knight type class that is lawful evil, that is that holds that code of honor and its own sort of deranged moral compass. And that is sort of where I got the idea to come up with that option of the Fell Paladin, which someone could make or play starting at first level, or it may come into play if somebody is playing a paladin and they fall from grace.
And I think that is a class, and I'm glad you added that, because I feel like in the world of Hyperborea, it's really hard to be a really good character. It is such a brutal world. And I like the idea of, not to say that you can't have lawful good characters. I just find that a lawful good character for me in Hyperborea will play or feel differently than another game. Just because of the setting. It is such a brutal setting. And
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so in my home game, so we have a lot of action that occurs in Chromarium, which is the largest city in the realm. And Chromarium is sort of the melting pot of Hyperborea, in which there are many races and cultures that populate Chromarium. But it is a largely sort of chaotic, neutral-based city in which, law is not enforced with any type of equality. And it's, people worship Sathagwa, it's a corrupt oligarchy that runs the place. And so when you take a city like Chromarium, so what I did was I did sort of the flip of what you would do in a normal law-abiding city. So I have a cult of Apollo in my Chromarium, in which they are basically led by these lawful good paladins, but they sort of live in the underground trying to spread their word of, of law and righteousness. So they actually become like a cult. In a city like Chromarium, they function as a sort of cult.
That's very interesting. And Danny plays a Apollo paladin in our game, the Matthew McConaughey paladin, and it's been a lot of fun. And his question, I'll let you have. What was the class question you texted me earlier that you were going to ask, Danny?
Oh gosh, which one?
It was the one where you said, "What's your favorite?"
Oh yeah, what is your favorite class? I know you designed them all, so they're all your babies. But what is your favorite class, and why is it Paladin?
It is not Paladin. I would say my favorite class is probably the Necromancer, because I just loved the different necromancers that are in the various Clark Ashton Smith stories. And they really define for me what it means to be a necromancer. I love that sort of stuff. But my take, I guess it all depends on when you ask me and what, because I could change so easily. I really love, I think one of the underappreciated classes in the game, one of my personal favorites is the Scout. I think they have a really cool combination of abilities. I like the sort of exploration skills that they have blended with the thief skills and the backstabbing, and they can fall from a building and things like that. So they really have this cool sort of combination of skills. We added the disguise ability shared with the assassin for the Scout, so which they could do various disguises. And I think it's a fun class. But yeah, those are probably two of my favorites. And of course, some of the I love some of the unique stuff that we have too. Like, there are a lot of games that have something like our Warlock, whether it be through something that's, a multi-class type character or something of that nature. But I think something like our Purloiner is different than things that I've seen before, in which you have a holy thief, a thief who also practices the sorcery of a cleric and worships a god of larceny, such as we have Rel in this game, or they might worship Sathagwa or something like that. So I like to think that we have some unique character classes along with some traditional character classes, and together, I think that the basic idea behind a lot of these classes, in their sort of colored descriptions that start each one of them, is that they fit into the campaign setting of Hyperborea. That they're not written to be generic or intended to be generic for any game system, which is cool. There's a lot of games that have a sort of plug and play mentality to them, in which you could take the game and you could put it in a Forgotten Realms, or you can put it in a Dark Frontiers or whatever. The whole thing can be picked up and played with different types of settings. But what we've done is made Hyperborea, super focused and specialized, which I like to think is part of its character and charm.
I love the uniqueness of a lot of the classes for sure, and I love the fact that you don't have multi-classing. Because that was one of the first things a lot of people look at is, well, how can I do this or this? I was like, well, you have a subclass that is a multi-class. Like my friend Bob, our voice actor who's playing the Bard, he is the worst at multi-classing. Like I don't think he's ever played a game ever that he did multi-class. And when he rolled up his stats and he kind of fell into the Bard, I was like, this is the truest multi-class that you could come up with. And the more he's playing it, he's like, Trevor, I love this character. It's perfect for me because it is a multi-class.
Right.
And the fact that he's playing it like, the thing I find interesting most about the Bard is that it has such a druid feel to it. And I think that is something that I see other games that may have maybe a version of a Bard that has like that Fey feel to it. But this one, it just there's something about the Bard in this game that I absolutely love.
They're the true dabblers. They they're kind of more like they are intended to be a subclass of the thief, but they're just sort of like hedge magicians stealing their magic from these various sources, and
they're good fighters too. I mean they can
no
do
slouches. Yeah, they can do so much, and the In-Spirit Allies ability is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
They can mesmerize somebody. They have that ability that they can counteract the sorcery of say like a harpy or something like that. But I find it amusing that your friend who's an actor is playing a bard.
Yeah, I know.
Nothing like getting out of your comfort zone, right? You should tell him that he should play a monk that takes a vow of silence.
Bard in real life.
Yeah, it's a bard in real life. He's having a lot of fun with it for sure.
I'm sure.
That was good stuff.
One question, if you don't mind, Trevor, that I saw a few times was, do you ever, and I think I know the answer to this because it kind of goes back to the sword and sorcery type feel, but do you ever intend to introduce other races such as gnomes, elves, dwarves, etc. like that? And, I guess a lot of players or a lot of people don't really know, the whole sword and sorcery philosophy behind that. If you could just kind of explain to them too.
So, I mean, there's a different feel to sword and sorcery stories than there are with high fantasy stories. And I really, I recently read a book by someone with whom I've become friends with on Facebook by the name of Brian Murphy. And
Flame and Crimson?
Yes, Flame and Crimson, in which So Brian wrote this. Yeah, so Brian wrote Flame and Crimson, which basically it explains it sort of reaffirms for those of us who are sword and sorcery fans why we love this sort of genre of fiction and what differentiates it from high fantasy, which I love as well. I enjoy it quite a bit. But I feel like once you blend the two, it is simply high fantasy at that point.
Right.
It is epic storytelling. One of the big things I really loved. Stuart Marshall wrote one of the introductions to an earlier version of Hyperborea, and in it he talked a little bit about sword and sorcery being more about plucking the gem from the demon idol, as opposed to say going out and saving the world from a dark lord. With a party comprised of all these different demi-human races and humans all working together to fight the great big bad evil power out there. And so sword and sorcery is a little bit more personal. It's a little bit more it's the stories tend to be shorter. The narrative seems to usually focus around a few characters, usually one character, and there's an indescribable mood and tone to it that really differentiates it from. I mean, there are plenty of stories that you could say you could say that they combine elements of the two and pull it off well. I mean, Fritz Leiber with his Grey Mouser stories, some of that you can look at as a sort of high fantasy, but then other stories you read, and you're like, this is straight up sword and sorcery pulp fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it sort of pollutes the intent if I were to ever, introduce elves and gnomes and things of that nature into Hyperborea. So, if people want to do it, they can definitely do it in their own games. Because I've had plenty of people who tell me like, hey, I took Hyperborea and I put it on the North Pole of my Greyhawk campaign, and people can cross over into Hyperborea from there. So I have some elves in my Hyperborea, and I think that's awesome. Go ahead, have a great time with it. It's intended to be a toolbox for you to utilize as you and your players enjoy doing.
Right. Yeah, I find with older players, such as our age, I guess, who kind of grew up on the earlier D&D versions. I find it's a lot easier for them to buy in on the OSR stuff than it is for newer, younger players who maybe all they've known is fifth edition. It can be kind of hard to for them to understand sword and sorcery because they've known is Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
and like you said, the fifth edition is great. And I know with Trevor and I, it was funny, we got into Appendix N, got back into the sword and sorcery right at the same time. It all just kind of coalesced at the time. You had been running fifth edition online for a year and a half at that time. At that point, we kept having these conversations. It's like, man, it's not deadly enough. It's not savage enough. Nothing I can throw at you guys.
There's no fear. There's no fear.
Yeah. Fear. And so we started thinking back on when we were learning, and I think we're kind of on the younger end of the older guys, I would say, probably. Right. I was playing with guys who were 16 years old teaching me D&D when I was like 8, and those, those sessions are the most memorable to me because they were frightening and they were, I just love the design and the philosophy of a more sword and sorcery OSR feel. And I don't know, it just hit us right at the right time, and it's a great system.
Yeah, what I was talking to Jeff about this before we came on is that when I was playing, and I love 5th edition, I'm not ever going to knock it because it's just a different game, but what I was doing is at the time, I was reading all this Appendix N stuff, and I was reading like Lovecraft and Robert Howard and Clark Ashton Smith, and I was trying to take that and put it into 5th edition. And I felt like I couldn't get an element of fear into my players because everyone are superheroes. It was like, it's like if you've got a bunch of people like the Justice League running around, I can't throw something at the Justice League, so it was just a different game. So when we came and started playing Hyperborea, it was just it rejuvenated me as a DM personally, because it was like, I'm finally able to pull all these things I'm reading into this. And I'll tell you, I'm amazed at how many people have come from 5th edition that are enjoying playing an older, because it's so refreshing. And it's been great. Like, people who I would think like, hey, my character died, it's great, I get to play another one, and I think that's really cool. And one thing that we've done in our games, and I heard you talk about this before, is, when you make a character, it can't have a backstory. It has to earn the backstory.
Right.
The first couple of levels are your backstory, but you can't just show up with a first level character with like 3-page backstory. No. You got to earn it.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So it's good stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I would say, to hit on what you were just talking about, one of the largest sort of places of growth that I've seen within the game come from players of 5th edition coming into this game. I think, if you had asked me 10 years ago, I probably would have told you that I couldn't be doing this 10 years from now, that the hobby would be fading away and that it would be completely taken over by video games by that point. So 5th edition has been wonderful in that it has sort of created this whole new fan base. It has brought people back into the fold, and it has it has fostered this whole new generation of players who have come into the hobby. But what has happened, as a result, is that a lot of those players, especially these young players, they've started to get a little bit curious about exploring other game types. And and so that is where I find when I talk to some of these players, how did what were you playing before Hyperborea? And they'll tell me, oh, I was playing Pathfinder, or I was playing 5e. And so, and they don't really even have that baseline as the three of us have with AD&D first edition, second edition, or whatever. They never even played that before. It's their baseline is 5e and Pathfinder, and yet they're curious to, try something that is new.
Mm-hmm. No, it's been very cool to see. Go ahead, Danny.
Something you said earlier was you were talking about simplifying things and how some things can, feel cumbersome. And I think those, something I tell Trevor all the time when we're playing or after we play or when I'm thumbing through the book is I love going back to that old school thing of where you have, there's not 8 abilities every time you level up. That was one of my biggest things about 5th edition. I had a spreadsheet for this Goliath Rune Knight I was playing where I could do like 5 different things on like reaction, bonus action, and it was overwhelming,
Right.
It almost lends itself to power gaming, and I can't stand that. Power gaming. So I love the simplicity, getting back to more. I think it makes you think outside the box more as a player. And I absolutely love that.
Right.
One thing I have been amazed at the table is whenever you take the buttons away, they have more options. And it's really wild to see. It's like I've been watching Danny play, and it's like he has fewer buttons, but he's doing more because he's not like, oh, this is the point that I push this button, and it's like, oh, now I have to open up the toolkit, and it's very, very cool how less is more. In the type of system. All right, so we have a couple more questions coming in. Okay, so I have some. These are questions that came from the community. Headstone asks, is there anybody working on Hyperborea novels? Because you get like your Dragonlance books and stuff like that. He wants to know, do you have anybody that might be working on Hyperborea novels?
No, there's nothing like that at this point.
Oh, that would be fun, though. That might be a fun endeavor so if somebody wants to write something, it'd be really cool.
Sure. My concern with that, and it's funny that it's brought up because I was just having this conversation with my buddy Dennis, who's in my weekly game just this past week. And, my concern would be is that the game itself and its setting draws so much inspiration from other fictional sources that it would be hard to write a Hyperborean novel without it really delving into pastiche, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could be a lot of fun, but it would be for people outside of gaming circles. It could be. I don't know if it would be their cup of tea. So it's tough. It's tough to say.
I don't know.
So it's not anything that's in development.
Yeah, we'll put that in development. I like it. All right. Other questions that came in. With the success, this came from Urix. This is Matt in our channel. He said, with the success that you had with the last Kickstarter for 3rd edition, are there any plans for future Kickstarters?
Yes. So the next Kickstarter is going to be for 3 more adventure modules.
Okay.
So one of them is called The Vanishing Isles of the Summer King. And that's written by Jonathan Bingham, who was on the channel here earlier. I'm not sure
I saw him on there. Yeah.
But so he wrote it and he's illustrating it as well. And I play tested it at some conventions a few years ago, but things got really stalled due to the pandemic and everything. And going into the 3rd edition of the game, sort of put that adventure on the back burner, but now bringing it back to the fore. And it's a great sort of mid-level adventure that is based on this sort of weird heretical druidic cult. So that's a lot of fun. There's another module that we will have in the next Kickstarter that's called 1,000 Eyes of Thaumagoria. and that is
These titles are great.
yeah, that's a lower level adventure written by Ben Ball, who's done a lot of Hyperborea work. He is probably most well known for writing the adventure module Beneath the Comet.
Okay.
But Ben has done some great work. I've been running that. I've run it out at TotalCon a few weeks ago, which is in Massachusetts, and I'm running 3 sessions of it at GaryCon in a couple of weeks. So looking forward to running that. I'm also at GaryCon. I'm going to be doing I was invited to do something called the Celebrity Game. So what that is it's like a late night Saturday night game in which you have a combination of some celebrity players and regular gamers who sign up to go to the con. And so far confirmed, I have Skip Williams and Errol Otis who will be playing in that game. So they'll be playing in Thousand Eyes.
So one of the guys in our Discord, Chance, is in that game, and he is super stoked. He's one of the regular gamers. Chance is super excited. Cool. Yeah,
it's going to be a lot of fun.
That'll be fun. All right, so what's the timeline on the next Kickstarter?
There's one more adventure I want to tell you about. It's called The Oblation Slab of the Hepatomancer. And
I love these titles.
So a hepatomancer is a type of it's a type of dark sorcery in which someone will sacrifice an animal or even a person in this case and draw out their organs and then study the liver and draw divinations from looking at the organs and whatnot and how the gods choose to speak to them based off these eviscerations. It's pretty dark, brutal stuff. So that's all. That one's written by my buddy Joe Macarone, and that's one that I am actually just submitted today to be run at North Texas RPG Con. So I'll be running that in the Dallas Fort Worth area in June. So that will be a lot of fun. So the timeline, you asked me about this. So the timeline it's really dependent on a few different factors. The print, shipping, and fulfillment of the 3rd edition books is of primary focus right now. So once that is complete, then I will look to see how far along. All these books have been written already. These new modules, they're all written, and art is in various stages of completion, and editing is in various states of completion. So I want to have the covers on all 3 completed, and I want them to each be further along. But I suspect by at some point by the early summer or so, I'll be able to have a better idea of when those will launch. But I want to say that it'll be a launch by the end of the summer, early fall.
Okay, that's exciting. That's exciting. Well, if you need any more playtesters, I might know some. Okay. All right. Other questions came in from the community. Let me go over here. Okay. So this is a ruling question that I don't think you could possibly imagine how this came up. But in our last West Marches game, a Runegraver cast Mount, and it was on a ledge over a Manticore, and he drops the Mount on top of the Manticore. So he was like, how much damage does this do? And I'm DMing this. I'm like, all right, well, let's think about this. You're dropping an 800-pound horse on a Manticore down 20 feet. And I know that it's a D6 damage for every 10 feet that you fall. And then we just arbitrarily put a D6 for every 200 pounds of the horse. So we came up with 6D6. There was nowhere in the book for me to look what is it dropping a horse bomb on it. So I was like, is that close?
I would, right around what I would do for a ruling, because that would be the first thing that I would look at is how far it's falling and how much damage would it take from the fall. But when you're looking at an animal that weighs that much landing on something else, but it's also something of prodigious size itself, I'm going to go with probably about 5d6 damage. I would add a couple of d6 to
I was
the
close. So I said 6d6, 5d6. Right. I think we're in the same. Yeah. Bomb. It's the horse bomb that everyone was talking about. Right.
But the thing that I would like to stress, and I think that we can all appreciate it if you're either watching this right now or if you're checking it out on YouTube later, if you're so much into games of this style that you would actually watch something like this, then I would say that what we have here in an instance like this is what really differentiates us from our video game playing counterparts, in which they have defined parameters of what they can and can't do, and they must abide those. They cannot have something like a mount spell falling down onto, what was it, a manticore?
A manticore, right.
There are things like, you can't do things like that because it's not in the program. And so that's really the beauty of tabletop role-playing games, are only limited by our own imaginations.
So people in chat are blowing up. They're saying, we officially have a horse bomb ruling. They're super excited about having the official horse bomb ruling. I thought that was pretty
4th edition. We'll add it to 4th edition.
We'll add it to 4th edition. They say we'll add it. We'll add a horse bomb to the chart of 4th edition. That's hilarious.
What's even more hilarious, if you think about it, is the mount spell. If the mount was stolen from somebody else, and that thing gets destroyed onto the manticore, and then the spell ends, and the mount arrives back to this cataphract somewhere 1,000 miles away, and it's dead, and it's got manticore guts on it. That would be pretty amusing.
So this player has murdered 3 horses in 2 games using that spell. There's gonna be a comeuppance, I think, at some point.
That's the god of horses is Krimmer, right?
Krimmer's going to come after him, right?
Favor. Yeah, they become cursed by the horse god.
That's hilarious. And I think that's something that's so fun about this game, is just like some of the wild things that happen. It's just, to me, because you're just pulling from so many different things, and to go back to the weird technology stuff too. One of the things that happened in our game is our character Bob, he found a radium pistol, and we just called it a wand for a while, because to him it was a wand, and then. But I loved, and then people in chat were like, "Oh, he's got a gun." No, it's a wand. It's a wand, But stuff like that is fun. Like, I love the fact there's grenades and flamethrowers and stuff, but it's also this sword and sorcery. I just think it's a blast. So, Danny, do you have any follow-up questions?
He pulls the trigger.
Yeah.
I think we hit a lot of those. BG wanted to ask him what, because he calls himself a hobbit, BG the Hobbit, and he wanted to ask, what was your favorite holiday meal? Asking as a hobbit, that's what he was asking.
Favorite holiday meal?
Yeah.
My favorite holiday meal? Well, when I was a young lad, my grandmother used to make lasagna, and I always loved her lasagna. It was my favorite.
Lasagna.
I'll go with that.
Go with lasagna. I love it. All right. So, chat, do we have any more questions as we're kind of rounding out the night? Let me see if I saw any more come through. I think we hit most of them. Here's one. Will you be doing another print run of the canvas map, the large canvas map?
Oh yeah, so I'm going to do one that is in the new
Atlas.
That's in the style of that. Yeah, that's definitely something that I plan to do. It will probably come right on the heels of doing the fulfilling the hardbacks.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of requests for that. Unfortunately, I don't know that I can send it anywhere outside of the US and Canada, because the last couple of times I've tried to send them internationally, they've been sent back to me because there's a limit on how long a poster tube can be to some of these countries. And I don't quite understand it. You can send a box full of 70 pounds of books, but you can't send a poster tube.
That's wild.
So I don't know. Maybe there's some way around it that I don't know of yet. I'll have to check it out. But right now, I don't know that I'll be able to do it outside of the USA and Canada.
Okay. And I have the old one, and I love it. There's nothing more fun when I'm playing the game live is to put the map out, because, like, okay, we're here. This is where we are. It's a great setting piece. Will you have an update to the DM screen, because there's a few little minor things changed with 3rd edition?
Yeah, actually, what I'm thinking of doing is at least for the short term, what I want to do is offer a PDF in which there are a few tables that are sized just so that if somebody wanted to cut them out and tape them over the other charts, they can do so, um, and then everything remains perfectly compatible instead of mostly compatible. Because
It's like 95% or 98%. Yeah,
and
it's
the
really
two-weapon
close.
fighting chart is on there, and that's wrong. I slightly simplified item saving throw categories, so there's a little bit of change with that. The other thing is we just made the large shield a simple +2 AC bonus, so that would need to be changed. Those are the changes that really come to mind. Like all the stuff with weapon damage, saving throws, all the attributes, strength,
It's
dex,
the
none of
same.
that has
Yeah.
changed. It's all the same. Yeah.
Other question. I'm just trying to make sure I get all the community chat. Okay, see, we got the new adventures question. Oh, we did have a question. Will any of the new adventures coming out be high level?
Yes, the last one that I mentioned, it's a short adventure, but it packs a punch. The Oblation Slab of the Hepatomancer.
And what level do you think that'll be?
I want to say that that's looking like a seventh, eighth, ninth level. I have to really we have to determine it. It's something that you have to really take a look, and it's going to require a little bit of play testing to determine. I'll try it out with some seventh level guys, and if they get wiped out right away, I'll know that maybe it should be a little higher.
It should be a little bit higher. All right, and then I'm just trying to round out the questions here. Is there any plans to have like a full campaign book? Most of your adventure, I think all your adventures, they're a story of so many sessions. But some people they like the ones where it's like, this will take you 1 to 10. Is there anything like that in the works?
Nothing in the idea of like what's been popular for the last couple of decades, or what they call an adventure path, right? Nothing along those lines, but the next big project that I'm going to personally do is going to be a Chromarium source book. And so it's going to be it's I don't know if it's going to be a hardback or if I might do it as a box set. I'm not entirely sure, but it's going to have a whole bunch of different adventures in it. It'll have several adventure seeds in it, in which you present a paragraph or two to the referee and let them fly with it from there. So that will be a really exciting project, and that's ultimately leading to what I hope to be my magnum opus, is going to be my mega dungeon of Mount Vermithidon.
Somebody actually asked about that today. Someone actually, I think they saw there was a little blip about it, and they're like, "What's with the mega dungeon?" So yeah, that'll be awesome.
Yeah, I plan to do it. It's at some point. It's so I want to do Chromarium first. I want to have that major city done first before I do the mega dungeon.
That sounds amazing. All right. Cantanker's B says, if you want the canvas map internationally, research mail fraud. Got it.
He also asks, we know you just expanded some of the races, some of like Romans and Greeks in the new one. But is there any intention on expanding those further? For instance, I would love to see your take on Aztecs in Hyperborea. Is that, any other races come to mind that you might like to put in the future?
Sure. Well, I would say this. It was sort of buried in the first two editions of the game, and the reason why we had so much expansion of the race is because people were asking me, "Hey, you have this race in the game, but I want it to be written up as playable." So really, there was only one new one that was introduced, and that was the Franks, the Carolingian Franks. They're supposed to be Franks from Charlemagne's era. So all the other ones that were added, whether it be the Moors, the Romans, the Lemurians, they were all Greeks. They were all in there or mentioned in there as being existing, but either on the brink of extinction or living in tight pockets in places where people didn't know how to account for them. So I kept getting questions. I want to play one of these. I want to be like, well, go ahead, play one. But I decided, like, you know what? Maybe I should write up some formal descriptions of these,
Mm-hmm.
and get them in there. Now, as far as Aztecs go, I've been a little bit hesitant of going that far below the equator because the main thrust of Hyperborea is that most of these races have crossed the north wind to get there. Now we have some exception cases. The Cimmerians, how they arrived from a sort of misty veil in the Caucasus, and different stuff like that. So there's definitely a precedent set for races arriving in Hyperborea by means other than the north wind. So it could definitely happen. But the majority of them have somehow crossed the north wind by literally going up to the Arctic to do so. So it's definitely a possibility. I'm not against it. I encourage. I get a lot of questions like this because obviously there are so many ethnicities and cultures in our world, and and we also have a lot of mythological cultures which we have brought into the game. So it's not supposed to be completely analogous with earthly cultures when you have things like Atlanteans and Amazons and Hyperboreans and the list goes on. The Mu, there's so you have your mythological races, but then as far as real world cultures, I always encourage people like, hey, if you see something that you want, just bring it into your game. You don't have to ask my permission to do it because there are so many ethnicities, so many fascinating cultures out there. I would love to have like Aboriginal Australians or something like that show up somewhere, as I think that's a fascinating culture. But there's only so many that you could do at the end of the day because it is a relatively small continent, but it's also very small population groups, and that is attributed to the Green Death, which swept across Hyperborea about 1,000 years ago and wiped out nearly 90% of humanity, allowing the populations of monsters to grow while mankind slipped into relative obscurity. So you can have these different races and cultures, and they might come from you might have, say, Aztecs who arrive at one point, and then you can have some futuristic race arrive at another point because they don't necessarily have to come from medieval period or Renaissance period or anything else. They might well be from our future crossing over.
It's very interesting. There's just so much you can do with it, and that's what I just love. It's so open ended. Danny, do you see any more questions? 'Cause I think you're checking Discord, right?
Let me see here. Someone was asking up in the YouTube, is there any plans for a a monster book, a Hyperborea world book, or a wilderness survival guide for Hyperborea?
Well, you expanded Monsters in 3rd edition. There's more, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't want to start talking about a new edition before we even get this edition out. But I would say if we continue to add more monsters, and most of our monsters are coming from the adventure modules, like every adventure module seems to introduce one or two new monsters. And then, you get the itch to just keep adding more of these elements. And I think that, there is the possibility that it, in much farther down the road that we could have a straight up monster book. But I'm a little reluctant when you ask about setting to do like a full blown setting book, because what I try to accomplish with Hyperborea is a setting that is evocative yet has brevity at the same time. So that you don't feel like you have to have a master's degree in Hyperborea to be able to run it. You can be able to look at these various lands, these cultures, these religions, festivals, all those things of that nature, even the cosmology that we talked about. And it's very rich and it has a lot to it, but I try to do it with brevity. And I feel that the more and more you add, the more you can actually start to lose. Because what I would ideally like to see is guys like you, Trevor, who run it that put their own personal stamp on it. So you might like one aspect of the game and you embrace that and you run that part of the setting, but you also have some stuff that you like, that you read or that you saw in a movie or whatever that you want to incorporate. And when you start to do that, you make it your Hyperborea. And I want everyone to be able to have that opportunity without having to, look over their shoulder at some massive tome on how it's supposed to be run.
And I love that, because when I look at the map, I look at it like it's not a blank canvas, but there's giant areas that are blank, and that's the place I want to play. Like I love the fact there's borders and there's an island here that literally there's no information on it, but I want to write a story about this island. That's my island. And I love that. Yeah.
See, not everyone's like you. There are some referees who are the exact opposite of what you just described. They look at that and they say, "There's nothing there. I don't know what to do with it, so I'm just going to ignore it." I need that direction. I need to even if it's just a paragraph or two. They need that spark to start with, and then develop it.
Yeah, I saw Dagon Bay and I'm like, that's my game. I don't know what do you need. I don't need anything else. I love that story and that's my game. So that's fun stuff. BG, I got a question just came in. What's your this question may change with the weather, but what is currently your favorite monster in Hyperborea?
What is my favorite monster in Hyperborea? I really love the Lovecraftian monsters, even if they've reached a point of being cliche at this point. But the Great Race always fascinated me. Night Gaunts, I love them.
We recently ran the color out of space in one of our games, and it terrified. The players were terrified. The chat was terrified. They're still getting their constitution back from it.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, that's really tough. We have some cool ones. My buddy Chainsaw invented one for us that's called the intestine zombie, and it basically shoots out its intestine and strangles you with it.
That's awful. Someone in chat says they like the Thu wagon.
Oh, the Thu wagon. So I got the idea for that from a Jack Vance story. It was from a short story. It wasn't connected to any of his larger series. And I thought it was the weirdest, creepiest sounding creature. They would be like sort of wrangled by these guys that knew how to pry certain parts of its anatomy with a sort of rod that would make it move, and they would feed it some kind of disgusting sap that it would drink that would keep it nourished. And I just thought, wow, that would be great. I'd love to put something like that in Hyperborea. I don't remember what it was called in the Jack Vance story. I'd have to look that back up.
Yeah.
And I will say one of the things that I absolutely love about Hyperborea, and this is a design choice on you that I just applaud, is that everything is backwards compatible. I love that. I love the fact that we have a new edition, but I can play the old adventures. In fact, the 2E book still is fine. There's some nuances that are different, but I love the fact that we get updates. Not necessarily like, oh, I got to throw everything out and start over.
Yeah. Time to be all over again.
Oh, yeah. No, I love it.
Right.
All right. So, rounding out, we do have an announcement to make. And I'm super excited about this. Chat, we have a huge announcement. Jeff has, at some point, we don't have a date. Jeff's going to come on and run Hyperborea for us on the channel. I am super stoked for that. And what we're going to do, we're going to have, I will go ahead and tell you, I'm taking the first seat and Danny's taking the second seat. And then, but we are going to have a seat or two open for the community that we will raffle off when that happens. So it will be sometime soon, but Jeff's going to come on. He's going to run a game for us. We'll stream it. And there'll be a chance for you to play with us, to play with Jeff. And I think it'll be super, super awesome. I am stoked. And here's the thing. I am the quintessential forever DM. So I am so excited to actually. In fact, I'm actually thinking about coming out to Texas just to play. Was it Texas Con, North Texas Con?
Yeah, you should. It's a great little con.
Yeah, my brother's in Austin, so he may actually drive up as well. We're talking about it.
Nice.
So coming up soon, look for the announcement. We will have a Jeff Talanian night where we get to play.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
It's gonna be a blast. It'll be a lot of fun. I know. I get to play. So I'm itching to play a cataphract. I really want to play a cataphract.
Okay.
I love the idea of having a shield. I love fighting with a shield. I just love the idea. I do want to say, Jeff, thank you so much for taking time to come and chat with us about Hyperborea. I can't wait to play with you. And maybe if time permit, maybe down the road we can have you come and cameo in one of our games. We'll have you play with us.
Oh, that'd be fun.
That'd be fun. We'll do that. All right. So guys, thank y'all so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. We will be playing Heroes of Hyperborea on Tuesday nights. And if you are interested in joining and playing Hyperborea, you can join our Discord. We'll have a link down below, and you can go on. And we actually have West March's game, which is like an open table where people can come in. They can play the game, create characters. We need DMs, we need players, but it is a living world where you can come play online and play some Hyperborea. And with that, we thank you, and we'll see you guys next time.